everybody, it's Mike Young, lifestyle nutritionist with aPlantBasedDiet.org. Welcome to chapter 70 of the book, Live to 150. We're almost halfway through the book, I think, if we're doing 150 chapters. This one is on food for the mind. Okay, this is important because, as I said, food is 80%, but I didn't say it has to be physical food, did I? It can be what you're looking at, like watching this video right now, what you're listening to, the most important senses, I'd say, are the sight and the ears, although there are many other senses, as we know. There's 5 of them, but these are the most important, the most influential, and the ones that I'd say most people don't even think about. Now, what am I talking about? Well, do you watch violent stuff like movies? I know it's just entertainment, but you know what? This affects you. Do you listen to the news on a regular basis? Because the news in general, I'd say the purpose of them, of course, or any publication for that matter, is to say what their advertisers want them to say. And usually the way they do that on the news, if you're talking about the local nightly news or the local national news, whether that's on the internet or on your device or on your TV, whatever method you use to get that information, they're fear-based for the most part. They want you to be fearful so that you tune in again the next day and say, oh my gosh, what do we got to be afraid of today? And the next day, et cetera, et cetera. And, I'm not talking about if you're tracking the financial markets, that's different. Although there's a lot of fear there too. I mean, a lot of market psychology. When the markets are really good, everyone's saying it's so great. And then when it's bad, they're like, oh, this is the worst ever. Don't ever have your money in these things, So, okay, but going back to that, a lot of people, they have different things going on in their brains. And and the importance of the takeaway from this chapter is to let you know that you have way more power over what is in your mind and what's replayed over and over in your mind than you think. A lot of this is just on it kind of borders along the subject of mental health, although we'll have a different chapter on that. But of course, in general with mental health, when you're depressed, you're living in the past. You're concentrating on things that took place in the past that are not happening right now. When you are nervous, when you are anxious and worried, you're generally focusing on the future and things that haven't happened and most likely will not happen at all. And yet you're spending all your time focusing on that. So you want to live in the present moment. You want to live right here, right now. The problem is, you'll also find that depending upon the content you consume with your eyes or your ears, that content keeps replaying in your head. All right. Just like past things, which you don't want to concentrate on. And I would highly recommend you go see somebody if you need to, talk therapist. Maybe you need to learn about just psychology in general. You can find lots of sources on the internet for that, like mastering your own psychology, that type of thing. All this stuff is out there now, which is great because it wasn't out there when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s. So I'm 52, born in 1970, and what's out there now is amazing. It's amazing the opportunities that people have to better themselves. And this whole book is about habits, really. If you distill it down to its basic concept, it's like you need to make better choices. You need to have good habits. It's not like we're talking about stuff that you can't understand. It's just that we're living in a time in humanity where most people aren't doing this. And I'm very much an optimist, of course, otherwise I wouldn't be putting this book together. And I'm sure that we will get to a point where we look back on these days and think that people were living like animals, basically, because that's the main difference between animals and humans. They're both sentient, but animals are generally reactionary, whereas humans have the capability to be proactive. So I want you to be proactive with the content you're consuming, not only just through media, but also the people you hang around with. We did a chapter on, you become like the 5 people you hang around with. And this is one of the reasons why, is because they're constantly spurting out things of noise and vision that you're seeing, you're taking in, and you can't help but kind of incorporate that into the way you act as well. Otherwise, if it was so horrific and bad, you wouldn't continue to hang out with these people. The same goes for the content. You must actually like this on some reason, some level. And I'm not a big fan of the news. Like I said, I don't watch it. I gather my content online, but I do not want to be fear-based, and I want to gather it as I need it. Because otherwise the news just controls you to come back and get fed some more horrific stuff, which there's plenty of stuff, plenty of, like they say in the news, if it bleeds, it leads. That's just the way it goes. Now, popular music, you can say the same thing about that. I mean, I grew up in the time where the only time you got some new music was when you were listening to the over-the-air radio in the 70s and 80s. And actually, the last decade, the real decade of music that was on free over-the-air radio was the 90s, I'd say, where I mean, now I turn on the radio, from what I've seen, it seems like it's all computerized. I don't think there's any humans on there anymore. All like an AI algorithm, I guess, depending upon the station format. But if you find that you've got songs replaying in your head over and over again, I'm sure that's affecting your concentration. And is it affecting it in a good way or a bad way? Because if it's affecting it in a bad way, where you cannot make good decisions in your life in general, you've got to start listening to some different music. The same is true with the content of whatever you're playing on the radio, or whatever you're listening to online, or whatever you're doing online, for that matter, when you get online. Because like I've said before so many times in this book, you can use the internet as an amazing resource, or you can just waste your entire life in meaningless stuff that you consume online. Okay. And actually, I'd like to shift even more, because what I'm talking about now in terms of what you're feeding your mind, it's generally as a consumer, right? You're consuming this content between your ears. Better, I mean, I'd say a positive progression is to consume better content, make better choices, so that more and better content that's going to be in line with your goals. You go back to the chapter on goal setting if you need help there. And maybe you need a goal on the type of content you're consuming. But also, I would get to an area or a space where you're actually producing content for other people, like I'm doing now. I'm producing this content so that hopefully you can consume it, and you're going to better your life because of that. That's the purpose of this. And that's the kind of positive circle you want to get yourself into. You want to get out of where most people are, which is just wasting time with the content they're consuming. Not only just wasting time, but they're destroying their inner thoughts because of the garbage that they're consuming on a regular and continual basis. And then they wonder why they can't catch a break. And all these bad things keep happening to me. And, et cetera, et cetera. Well, it's because of this narrative in your brain that's playing over and over again, because of the content that you are consuming on a regular basis. It's the food for your mind. And hopefully I have in layman's or layperson's terms, explain this in a way that makes sense, to where you're actually going to be motivated to get out there and do something about it, because you could change it right now. And all these, I know that if you've been consuming the wrong content in this day and age, in 2022, you've got all these algorithms and these things that keep spewing this more and more examples of the same content back to you, so you can quickly choose them. And maybe you need to get a new profile, get a new account, because the algorithm's so bad. It's just like the food choices. I mean, maybe you need to move somewhere else, because every grocery store you go to in most parts of the United States, they're loaded with 80% of the stuff in there you should not be eating, but it's all there. It's all in front of you all the time. It's so easy to just cheat all the time, and to just say you're going to do this and you just never do it. So this is, if you can kind of catch a theme here. Society is just screwed up at this point in time. And I really cannot wait till we get to the point where we can look back and say this was like the Stone Age. It's like the time when all of the information suddenly arrived to humanity, because it has in the last couple of decades since the internet was born. And most people just didn't know how to deal with it. They didn't. I mean, actually, let me give you one example of this before I end this chapter. I remember I got on Facebook, social media, before most adults that are my age. I got onto it in like early 2007. I say that most adults didn't even know it existed until sometime in later 2008. And the majority of adults didn't get on it until earlier part of 2009. And even at that time, it was still like a college thing, a kids thing. And the adults were like, "What is this? I don't understand this. What? Nobody who was an adult understood it. The younger generations understood it. But now, of course, Facebook as a social media platform is for old people, just going out there and sharing only the good parts of their lives. And then, of course, everyone gets depressed because they think everybody else's life is so much better than theirs, and I can't even look at it anymore. I gotta delete my account. Like that's like the evolution of Facebook, just from 2000, let's say 7 to 2022, It has really evolved. It is nowhere near, the average user is nowhere near what they used to be. But in the middle of that, okay, this is why I'm saying I'm optimistic. I think that people just don't know how to handle this. Well, actually, I can give two examples. Number one is a lot of people who are my age reconnected with people that they went to school with, that they thought they didn't even understand. They didn't ever think they would ever reconnect with these people from the 70s and 80s because there was no internet. And all of a sudden they were reconnected with everyone, and they couldn't get away from them unless they blocked them. Okay, that's a massive shift in understanding. And your content you consume is like this, because this is the content that people were consuming on social media. Most people were not producing anything here, but on the production level, I can also give an example of that. But of course, if you talk to lawyers who were involved in family law around that time, they will tell you there was a massive surge in divorces because of Facebook. That's all they just said, oh, it's because of Facebook, but what's the reason? The reason is that people didn't know how to handle that. They didn't think they'd ever see these people again. Be sudden they reunited with old flames and whatnot, and then all hell broke loose. Now, generations moving forward are not going to have that problem. And hopefully they'll be smarter and make wiser decisions. On the other side, the production side, I was running some groups that exploded. And I say the group explosion happened on Facebook between like 2010, 11 was the early days, to maybe the peak of it was like 2016, something like that. It's been almost like a downhill because there's all these other social media platforms and censoring and whatnot. And that's the whole, we're not going to get into that. But I remember that there were all kinds of people doing all this weird stuff. And you call them like the keyboard warriors because they weren't sure how to handle this stuff. These are all consumers of content. This all gets back to what I was saying about consuming content, because some people were coming into these groups and they were just they were wreaking havoc, and I was the one that had to manage this. And it's human behavior, but I think that we were just going through a period of time, because I don't see it so much anymore, where people didn't know how to handle the fact that they could communicate with all these, like I was running local groups, all these local people. All right. And some of them, you would do things typing in on the keyboard that you would never say to somebody in real life. And you would get in front of people that you would never get in front of in real life. And all these ridiculous situations that I had to deal with, as you can imagine, resulted from that. And you may know some of them yourself. You may have been involved in them. People who you'd never think would be involved in like death threats and violence and all this other stuff were involved in them because people didn't know how to handle it. Again, I think we're in the age right now where that's the thing. You've got all this content you can consume. You've got, and when I grew up, I didn't think I could ever get to this level of content consumption, or ever would, because all I could imagine was if I wanted some music to listen to, I would either have to get the random thing that played on the over-the-air radio station, or I would have to actually buy an album or cassette or CD or whatever it was. And that's the only way I could listen to some music I wanted. But of course, now it's free, just about anywhere. You find it online and play stuff whenever you want. You don't have to own anything. Everything's everywhere. But the problem is that people don't know how to handle this, and they're not making good decisions. Kids are not, even kids who are younger, I'd say, unless they are being raised or have been raised by adults who get this concept that I'm talking to you about right now, they're not going to have developed the good habits and the good decision-making skills it's going to take to manage all this information. And they're going to be controlled, their minds, what they're feeding their minds, by the bad stuff, the bad choices that they make. So hopefully you can understand how this is related to longevity. And I've gone on way longer than I want to in this chapter, but we can go off on so many tangents from this. Hopefully I covered with enough couple of examples there to explain to you how I think this is so important and why it affects everyone. And basically you need to learn how to manage this. This is an important skill. Everyone, no matter what your age, it's an important skill. Like if you're really up there in age, you may not even use the internet. I don't know. So maybe this doesn't affect you, but that's great. But at that point, that type of human is being phased out. People are going to have to be able to effectively manage this type of stuff, or be controlled by the AI, basically, which is not going to be to your advantage. So thanks so much for watching this chapter. Give it a like if you got some value out of it. And of course, subscribe to the channel so that you can get notifications of future chapters. See you in the next chapter. Bye-bye.